Okay, guys, this is your pod host, OG Goat. We want to wish everyone a Happy New Year and a belated Merry Christmas, because it's like a few days after Christmas, and a Happy Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and whatever else that you might be celebrating out there. And today we have a special guest on board named Azaa Khadraj. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, Azaa, absolutely.
Azaa Khadraj.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Outstanding. And tell me more about the history of your name?
Actually, that is the Arabic language. It is tribal, though. It dates like way back to like ancient, right, Northeast Africa. And it turns out Azaa does mean wings, or to spread one's wings. And then there's a tribal. I'm still researching, actually, the bulk or part of my name, language and phonology, right, and how deep it gets. But it's very ancient, it's tribal, and it deals with leadership and spreading one's wings.
Nice. Excellent. And we started this episode today because you brought out, you're the author of a book. You're
right.
The author of a book. Mm-hmm. And the title of your book is?
Know Thy Frenemies.
Know Thy Frenemies.
Mm-hmm.
I got to admit, this is the first time I've actually come across that word, frenemies. So Tell me exactly, what does that mean?
Okay,
frenemies.
Yeah. Frenemies also is, it's not something that like I invented, so to speak. It's something that was floating around the urban world that caught my ear, and I started to like dig into, not realizing that I myself had experienced so much of what this was. This was the earlier part of last year. And I started to dig into it and realize that I was defining and realizing what a frenemy was, that I had so much of that, not only in my life, but that I was virtually, just by default of my experiences, probably an expert on the term. So
interesting.
Yeah. So a frenemy essentially is, right, any person, right, male or female in your life who poses as a friend, who wears the mask of being a friend, someone who loves and supports you, when in reality they have a hidden agenda, right? Or could actually be a rival of yours and you're not even aware of it.
So let me see here. Can I classify a family member as a frenemy? Someone who may, I don't know. You tell me, can a family member be classified as a frenemy?
Absolutely. In fact, there's a section where I talk about the different types of frenemies. And family members are actually top of my list when it comes to the different frenemy types you can have, right? It's a chapter, literally, types of frenemies. And I know that, like, the frenemy term, you think of only friend, like, who's my friend? That really might be my rival. It's not just that. It's, in general, the people around us who pose as people who love and support you when they really may not. I mean, let's be honest. Some of us are still around our relatives right now, right? And we hope that all of y'all had a happy holiday, right? Like we were saying to each other before. But sometimes we go around assuming that everyone's holidays are all that happy, right? When in reality, more than 35%, like there's been countless articles and blogs, news posts, verifying that there's a bulk of people, that actually get somewhat depressed around the holidays, or, they're around people they don't necessarily want to see. I know people go to Thanksgiving dreading, other than eating and the turkey, which is the stuff that we like, we also have to go around our relatives. And I like the fact that the conversation has started about frenemies. I think actually was triggered probably around the pandemic, right? Because we all were stuck. Remember, we were all stuck in lockdown.
Right, that's right.
Right, husbands had to spend time with their wives.
Right.
You were living with your man or your boyfriend.
Started to learn more
about each other. Okay.
Yeah.
Side chick was in trouble, the whole shebang.
Yeah, definitely.
Because everybody was home. And so much came out as far as who we really were with. People, some people got more spiritual, went into yoga. Some people went left. Some people went nuts.
That's right.
Right. Some people started businesses.
That's right.
Like yourself and other individuals.
That's right.
However, we also had to sort of get real. People that you would think, right, would contact you or reach out to you during a whole pandemic, we found were not who you expect, right? Like I literally girlfriends, personal people that I know in my life were saying that sometimes total strangers they found reached out to them more during the pandemic. Okay, of 2020, 2021.
Yes, I've noticed that. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes,
Then
sure
sometimes
enough
your
did.
your own relatives. Right. And it's such a taboo topic because everyone wants to be so, sugary, right? No one wants to say anything bad about their family. But let's be honest, many toxic relationships, they don't just start with your husband or your wife. Although that's a type too. We'll get into that in a minute.
Okay.
Right. Toxic relationships are just relationships with people in your life. It could be your spouse. It could be your bestie. It could be your sister. It could be your dad. Who are the people in your life on a regular basis that bring you toxic feelings? Who raise your blood pressure, right, on a daily basis. And this is so important. I know you said you knew a mental health professional that you'll be bringing in later down the line, but one of the reasons I wanted to focus on wellness and preventing major health, mental health, or regular health issues was just learning how to be like, how do we be well?
Right.
How do we prevent mental health since we're just finally having a conversation? And that is first and foremost by regulating what we can control. And that is ourself. Hopefully, right?
Okay,
Control
right.
ourselves, what we consume, right? Physically, as far as what we eat, and who we put around us, right? Our social environments. We may not be able to fix the ozone layer or even the people at work, but we can be choosy as far as who is in our life, right? Who's my bestie? Is this person really feeling me, right? Let's figure it out. Who calls who more? Let's look at the micros.
There's an old saying that goes, if you can't change the wind, change the sails.
Change the sails, right? That's so perfectly describes what's happening because you can't control anyone at all. That's almost like a hamster wheel, trying to think about how we can adjust someone else's behavior. It's actually pretty dangerous to try to do that. But you can adjust yourself, right? I feel like just the fact that I'm not suggesting that you replace people with pets, but just the fact that there's been such a ridiculous spike, right, of people hanging out more, with less people. Social circles, I'm hearing, I don't know if this is factual, have gotten smaller. People are spending time, in nature, walking their dogs. Like, it's been a major spike. It's sort of almost like a revolution of people trying to get into their self-care, right? But a lot of that has included making one circle smaller.
Let me jump in here for a
Sure.
second. I was listening to the news this morning, and they actually did suggest getting a pet
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
for let's say the older generation.
Absolutely.
And it helps, according to their study,
Right.
against dementia and
Oh, wow.
mental. And I understand why, because that pet is keeping you occupied. Not
Right.
saying, like you said,
Right.
the pet is better than having a human.
Right.
I'm going to use
Yeah.
the term human because we're on the subject of a frenemy. So we don't
Absolutely.
know if this person has your
Your best
your
interest.
best interest.
Right. At heart.
But to keep the mind active, your next best bet would be, as
Yeah.
they say, a dog is a man's best
The
friend.
loyalty, yeah, is unmatched.
Yes.
I've seen it myself. That's actually number 3 on my must-have New Year's list. Like, I don't do resolutions at all. I just have things that I want to accomplish for myself, and getting a pet, right? Just a perfect pet that I can kind of, give and receive total reciprocal, unconditional love, and share that kind of just a feeling of certainty. I think that's why people get pets, right? Irregardless of what's going on, at home, with my family, there's always that constant that it's so hard to get with humans. But let's go back to frenemies, right? Essentially. So that's just one example of people starting to realize that let's try to cut this off at the path and deal with wellness. Let's figure out how to really analyze our relationships and kind of make better choices, which essentially is what I aim to do with Know Thy Frenemies. It started off last year. I was actually freaked out when I kept hearing all those stories. Remember, every 2 months we were hearing another insane story about someone's out with their friends and all of a sudden 4 girls go missing. There was a story about some college kids, I think in Wisconsin, correct me if I'm wrong about the state, who just went missing. They all went on spring break or something. Then there was the story with the young girl, the American, she was like a cheerleader, very beautiful African-American girl who goes on a holiday to Mexico, right? I believe they were calling it the Cabo Six. I'm not sure what the term was,
Right.
but she goes with these so-called friends. I believe just the guy
Right.
was her friend, and he bought other females.
Right.
So they're all hanging out. But according to the news and the clips that we saw ourselves, these people clearly did not like her. Right. Here she was, this beautiful, up and coming. She had her own business. I don't remember what, I think it was in the hair beauty industry business.
Hair or nails. I remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, she was on Facebook doing well. Entrepreneur, right? She had just graduated college. I think she did some fashion shows. And she pays for these friends.
Tickets. Yeah.
She funded
it was really
their
a
tickets.
heartfelt situation.
Oh my God. It was all over. YouTubers couldn't let that go. I did my own segments on it. I blogged about it because we were just shocked. How do you go to Mexico with friends and wind up in a body bag as a young woman?
Right.
And I really as a young woman, I had to really take a look at just myself in general, just who I'm choosing around me, because it just hit home so much about how the threshold for the people we go and travel with is so low sometimes, because I'm looking at it, I'm like, beautiful girl, but I'm like, how long did you know them?
Right.
Two of them she had never really known. She only knew the guy. And so there was like a little bit of an open door as well. Now, of course, you don't think you don't think that you're going to wake up and people are just going to like plot to kill you. You don't think that way. None of us think that way, and we shouldn't think that way.
Right.
So this is not like victim blaming, but I'm looking at how many open doors we leave open sometimes in not realizing how important it is to have the right people around us. I saw the clips on the news and I'm thinking, those girls don't like her. And I'm not sure whether she was unaware of it or just aware of it and didn't care. It was just like ignoring it. You know how we feel like.
Some people are just desperate to have that friend.
Right.
Not saying it was this type of situation.
Right.
But.
Bingo.
You know, when you classify someone as a friend, it comes with a certain criteria in my book.
It should.
You know, there's certain things that person needs to meet in order for me to be able to say, oh, yeah, this is my friend.
Yeah. That's a great point. And everyone's like, oh, young girl goes to Mexico with friends and, you know, she comes home or she doesn't come home. And this was a constant narrative. And the fact is, these people weren't her friends at all.
Yes.
Right? Even the guy who she knew for much longer, this man had gone to trips before with her family, they said, right? The young lady's mom had known him, right? There was some trust that the parents put in him to even, I guess, let her go to Mexico with him, right? To go outside the country like that. And he was one of the four who came home and blatantly lied to their parents, right? And excuse us for not mentioning names. We actually made a conscious decision not to name drop. But a lot of you listening might be fully aware of the story, you know, of the young girl who goes to Mexico last year, exactly around this time. Actually, this would be the anniversary month of when that happened, and didn't come back. And these so-called friends around her, namely the guy, all they could come up with is some sob story about being sick, getting drunk and being sick. They just lied to her parents. And to go further, those of you who know exactly what we're speaking of, you know, it was recorded what actually happened. And that was one of the girls who had some kind of unknown beef. To this day, nobody really knows what that beef was about. Walks into the room and starts pounding on her like a sumo wrestler, like pounding on her. Now they want to say, oh, well, it was probably just a fight. It was a fight they had. No, there was no fight. They attacked her because the young lady, she didn't strike one blow. We saw this. This was on tape. We saw that this woman was just being beaten by this one girl. The gentleman who was her so-called friend musters up, aren't you even going to hit back? Aren't you even going to hit back?
Wow.
Video.
I didn't even hear that part yet.
Yeah, he's right on camera. So basically he's videotaping, encouraging her, instigating for her to go ahead, right, and make it a real show, hit back. So he wants a cat fight. He's thinking he's just going to go viral maybe with a cat fight, maybe and throw it up on Instagram. Right? This is what I'm also thinking. Like, most of us don't necessarily think he intended to kill his friend, which we don't know. We hope not.
Right.
But I know certainly that girl did. You're not coming into a room swinging like a sumo wrestler thinking you're not going to seriously injure someone. Right? Or unfortunately take their life. Okay, and so the story also goes that there's another.
Did one of them have a medical background of some sort?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. There was one of them who was one of the three girls who wound up as they started to dig after they all came back from Mexico without the young lady,
Right.
that she was actually a CNA
Wow.
working at a medical facility. At the time, she's no longer working for them, thank God.
Wow.
It was reported that she allegedly was investigated several weeks after, when they found out where one of the suspects who went to Mexico with this lady, they found out that she's an employee at this medical facility, and the higher ups found out about the incident. They saw it all over the news, and obviously they want to cover themselves, right? They're not going to have somebody working with them who's out there taking people out, right?
Right, exactly.
So she was fired instantly, but we've never heard many updates since then, and that's what brings me here, really, right? This was one of several stories like this. I couldn't even follow 2022 after a while. It was one thing after another, but for some reason this one inspired Know Thy Frenemies a lot, because that could have been anyone.
Book.
Yes. You know, all that being said, that's pretty much what brings us here. The fact that here we are almost, or a little over a year in the anniversary of this mysterious murder in Mexico, along with several other homicides, namely femicides, which we'll go into that next term after. And in this particular case, people are still wondering why there hasn't been an official arrest of any of these 6 individuals that took this young girl to Mexico.
Okay, so now I want to ask more about this frenemy stuff. How do we identify it? Have you ever come across a frenemy in your life, and what is your suggestion to the audience as to how to deal with a frenemies or a frenemy?
Well, it's simple. I've broken it down to be simple, I should say. And I just realized, as you mentioned before, you touched on it, we have no criteria laid out, right? What is required, just like we date and we quote unquote have our list and we have our criteria. We don't really have that for our friends and the people we simply hang out with on a regular basis, especially, what college age, right? Sorority type, even high school. There's no criteria. You just hang out with whoever will, I guess, let you, or whoever you feel comfortable with, or who you can, rock matching clothes with and call them your bestie.
Remember through young students, and I think it was Rutgers University and some other universities that committed suicide, had these people around.
Oh, yeah.
Which was actually ended up being bullies or titled as bullies.
Yeah.
But these guys, I guess they might have considered them as friends. That's
right.
why they was around.
Correct.
And then they started to bully them.
Right.
So much to the fact that their students committed suicide.
Yeah. And that's something that is more common than is being talked about, which I always wonder about. Right? That they're not really highlighting just those small little areas of toxicity. Yeah, bully is a common term, right? But we have bullying throughout age groups. Just like this quote unquote incident that I highlight in this book, right? This was not a high school girl. These were people who had all graduated college. As we said, one of them was a medical professional. Mm-hmm. So they were in mid-20s, I would say. They were young, but they had gone to college together, but they were all graduates.
Wow.
So in our society's eyes, they were adults.
Wow, such a waste.
Full-blown adults who had gone through the educational system, right? Which is a whole sidebar, which we won't go down. We won't go down that road. But fully college-educated individuals get together and decide, come with a plan, right? To go viral. Attacking this girl or fighting with her, what have you. Who never gets to come home.
So now that you put it in that aspect, let's try to tighten it up a little bit. Are you saying that peer pressure is and the need to be accepted could be stronger than your goals and your aspirations of doing something positive with your life, that peer pressure and the need to be accepted just overwhelms that and supersedes what you want for yourself as an individual?
Yes. No, I am saying that. I'm insinuating. I'm leaning on it. Not only that, but I'm seeing that it's residual. It's something that, it starts when we're, in high school, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But, there's adult peer pressure. Like, that's an actual term. It continues. Wow. We're walking, replicas of our former self. We just it's just a new environment. Same trick, new game.
Wow. Okay. Talking about what part of the game is that?
What part of the game is that? What part of the game is that where, you can go through this, literally be a medical professional, someone who's actually supposed to be a part of a healing team and interested in people's wellness, right? From Monday through Friday, and on the weekend, go take someone out and think you're coming back to work on Monday, everything's gonna be okay. Okay, all in the sake of what? Like, it's so funny because everyone's like, well, acceptance, right? It's
peer pressure.
Peer pressure. Like, at what point? Because they, like I said, these people weren't that tight. They clearly weren't friends of this girl, right? But you hear them egging each other on. Okay, everyone, I guess, at some point agreed. There was some kind of agreement, right? It clearly wasn't to the victim's benefit. But there was an agreement to go down there and do this to her. And I guess they thought they were being slick, right? Doing that in Mexico, which ended up working against them, which I feel like is one of the reasons why it's so quiet. Why? Because now the Mexican government can pretty much do whatever they want with the attacker. Now, just for the audience's sake, we do not have, this case still a year later does not have closure, which is the biggest question mark of them all, because cases that are similar have been closed. They have been arrests in similar cases, right? Where people have gone missing. You were talking to me about that beach incident years ago, which is another example where people had gone missing. There were people found there. There were arrests made there. There were a few arrests made, I believe, with the college kids, right, who wound up being taken out by one of their students. And we will clarify in links exactly which news stories we're referring to, right? But we are not mentioning names on this cast for, professionalism and, of course, legal reasons. But yeah, the question is, how is it that something that was caught on camera, where you could clearly see there was a brutal attack which led to someone's death, there has been no arrest made for up to a year later? Like, what part of the game is that?
Yeah, it's crazy. And under the term frenemies, you have not just people that appear to be your friends, but if I have this correctly, it could be, let's say, could a church member be a frenemy?
Oh, you're hitting on all the areas that I touch on specifically, I think, like in the third or fourth chapter when I go into the types of frenemies.
Right.
Churches, community groups, that is where I believe they are born. Personally, really? I believe they're born. Because, in church, you don't have to go home with these people that you see in church. You don't technically have to like them, right? You just have to sort of smile and, provide that agape community love, right? Say cheese for appearances and, cook together, whatever your church does together. And then go home and take the mask off, right? Hang out with who you really like. And I personally, we talked about this weeks ago on another vlog, on another podcast, just how, church is pretty much these days a filler to sort of ease people's consciences. You kind of do what you need to do. I mean, people have said that for years anyway. You do what you want to do from like Monday through Friday, go to church, say a few Hail Marys. You know what I mean? Feel better about yourself. It's not something that is what it used to be, where people were like devout or, really about their faith, just with so many changes in our society. But this isn't that type of, podcast today, right? People's religion. But in general, church has become more of a social circle, right? A place to perhaps promote your business.
Right.
Okay, get your guilty conscience soothed, right? And you kind of keep it moving. But so that's a perfect breeding ground to be surrounded by people who may not necessarily like you, right? Or may not necessarily support you as a person. And there's no way of you knowing that.
I had a movie that I watch. This thing is kicking up so many ideas now. And I guess business partners could be frenemies.
Oh. Hello?
This
Hello?
movie, it was interesting because the movie, these guys went into business together and they were doing great, but one of the partners had an ulterior motive and he wanted to eventually take over the business.
Sure.
And so I guess the other guy thought that this was his friend he was in business with.
Yeah.
When the friend's intention,
Yeah.
the alleged friend's intention, was to eventually kill him and take over the business.
Sure. Well, all's fair and no love in business, right? Business is the one area where you're allowed to be cold, right?
Wow.
It's business. So
Even with your partner?
even with your partner, yeah, you hope there's a sense of loyalty. That's why he's your partner. That's why you trust him. So you don't want that. But there's a few movies that come to mind where business partners and friends eventually butt heads, or at some point.
Excuse me. Is there a way that we could, or we can give the audience an idea or a leg up on how to spot or recognize a frenemy before it's too late?
Yes, and I don't want to give that away, but I've broken it down. This is so important to me. It's like a labor of love because I feel like, we can go on about this and I can verse you and let you know. By the time you finish, let's just say, picking up this book, yes.
Okay.
Going through the pages, you will not only be a master of what a frenemy is, you'll know how to recognize a frenemy in your life, right? Because again, I mentioned very clearly that your friends are easy to recognize. Your true friends, they support you, they love you, they're consistent. Your enemies are also easy to recognize because they don't like you. They're haters, right? And we complain about haters, but hey, guess what? At least you know who that person is.
That's right.
Be my hater. Let me know, okay, you're not feeling me. Okay, so when you on the left, I can go to the right. But it's the frenemies that's the dangerous population. We don't know who they are. You're putting on a mask. You've pretended to care or to be this, that, and the third to me. And years later, I'm finding out who you are. We've had spouses, husbands and wives, right? Which is also in the book, a few examples of those. Famous couples who've ended up splitting and, yeah.
A wife that's a frenemy? Could you imagine?
Yes, I can. I can imagine. It's unfortunate, but the stories continue, about just the what happens to break down a relationship. Many times it's just at some point they lose trust for each other and start actually working against each other or competing at some point because one feels hurt or, one feels betrayed, and then it becomes this vendetta to avenge him or to avenge her for betraying you. Okay. And so you might have started off pure and in love. Okay. Only to end up with a frenemy on your hands in your own bed.
My wife is a frenemy.
Yeah.
What part of the game is that? Huh?
I don't know. I couldn't even tell you. Now, unless you really are prepared with a action-based, system that doesn't allow you to just pick up any old friend, any old person you hang out with, call any old body your bestie. You need a criteria the same way, right, ladies and young ones, a criteria of selection. Don't just go around calling anyone a friend, and then traveling with them, God forbid, or allowing people even the access to you to ever go that far with you without vetting them thoroughly first. You need a system. You need to know how to vet. What do I look for? What are the things that they shouldn't be saying? I mean, this book has so much detail, and I love the fact that I use real life stories. I use pieces of my own life. I mean, this is wonderful.
Sounds really interesting.
Oh yeah, we were even, teetering around with the idea of a part 2 because there's endless examples we could use in movies, in the media, with celebrities of people who wound up being hurt by someone closest to them. Okay, it's a tale as old as time. And guess what else comes to mind?
What is it?
The Bodyguard with Whitney Houston.
Oh.
Who ended up being the killer or the stalker of Whitney Houston.
I remember the movie,
Or Rachel.
but not in detail.
Rachel had a stalker, right? I remember the bodyguard, Kevin Costner.
Right.
Was
I
guarding
remember
her.
the actors in the movies, but who was it?
It winded up being her sister. Her sister paid someone to send her those crazy messages. Her sister was paying that hitman.
Wow.
Her own sister. And he finds out at the very end. Her sister. Same blood running through her veins. But it made sense. Here she was. Rachel Marin was the character, the successful singer, right? Beautiful, all the attention. And they were both adults. This wasn't even like two kids fighting for attention. But her own sister had just developed this growing jealousy, I guess, that she couldn't control after a while. And the story goes that, she hired someone and then wanted to like call it off, but she couldn't, right? Something of that nature. But she set it all in motion for someone to stalk her own sister. That is a relative frenemy. Classic example of a relative frenemy.
Yeah.
Okay, do you get any closer than sisters? Do we get any closer than sisters? No, we can't.
Okay.
Right, and that's just one movie. I personally believe, and we all can see that movies, what do they do? To So Is Life. Okay, they tell the stories that we live. And so it's important. This is the reason I broke down the types of frenemies, the things that they say, because sometimes people just say things to you that just don't really sound right.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna rub you the wrong way. It's a joke, but it's not a joke.
Exactly. I've come across it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Yeah, there's so many hints,
times, yeah.
and you feel it. You just don't really know because no one has given it the language to say this is a frenemy,
this
boo.
is.
Yeah.
Right, yes.
They like you, but they don't like you. They probably never did. Okay, they're just getting close enough to you and have enough access to you, right, to strike when they're ready. Very, very important. And so coming into the new year, my goal for everyone, just to like wrap it up, and of course, the holidays are going to probably like officially close around the 6th of January. I wanted to just make the book, which I feel like it's a manual at this point, available going into the school year, right? Because I think school, college, those are the key times where your friends are super important. I get it. All right. You got to have someone, you got to walk to lunch or homeroom with someone. You can have friends. No one's saying you can't have friends. We all need them. We're human beings, but be selective.
And keep an eye out.
Keep an eye out.
Who's real and who is not.
Who is not. Right? That's the essential question here. And I answer all of that in this book.
Okay. Listen. Azaa
Yes.
Khadraj.
Yes.
Khadraj. We definitely appreciate having you today on the show. And before we go, I want you to give the audience one more time a little detail about where to find your book, how to find your book, because it definitely sounds like a must-read.
It is. So right now it's available for pre-order on Amazon, right? We can add the links for you. But the hard copy is released on the 11th, 1/11.
Is there a way that you have a blog or website that they can connect with you on and, maybe they might want to ask you questions?
Yes. They can refer to knowthyfrenemies.com. Where I'll have the link to the book and hopefully an ongoing conversation for the community.
Outstanding.
Right?
I
Yes.
appreciate that. And, well, folks, I guess that's the end of this episode. Be on the lookout. We may have a part 2 coming. And this is your host, OG Goat, and we're signing off.
Awesome. Happy holiday.